Computer. All right. So what I'm going to talk about here is um, about the phone call that you get after the listing is done. And primarily what I'm going to be going through here is when you have a landlord and a tenant situation. That's the one that I'm really going to go through because those are the ones that keep coming back. And this will be months. I remember the worst case was we got drug into, KW United, and our listing agent, we got pulled in by a tenant that was complaining about the landlord, and we got subpoenaed, so we had to show up. And if you ever get subpoenaed, even if you know you're not part of it, you still need to go to court because the court will rule against you in default that you didn't show up. So when we showed up, Steve Gaskins was there and the listing agent, and the complaint was something about the deposit and some sort of condition of the property throughout the lease, and the tenant wanted money from the landlord. And the judge looked at the lease and looked over at Steve and the listing and said, "Now, who are y'all?" And Steve says, "We're the listing company and this is the listing agent." He said, "Okay, you can leave now." And so a lot of people think that our responsibility and liability lies out there for a long time when it comes to the the lease or the transaction, and it doesn't. This I'm pulling out of the code right here. Listing company is acting only as rental agent. So when you look at all the lease and everything, and you look at the agreement between the tenant and the agent, the tenant and the landlord, it says a lot about managing agent, managing agent, managing agent, your agent. What they're talking about in the lease is the managing agent who is the property manager. And unless you're in that role, that's not us. So it has no liability or responsibility for property management for the escrow funds deposited under lease. And that's where we get into trouble is when they're not returning the deposit or they're not doing what they said they would do in the lease. And so the landlord or the tenant gets upset and calls us 5, 6 months later. But this specifically says in the code, we're not responsible for that. So that's the main thing. And this is paragraph 6 of the lease is what that is. But here are the top complaints I get. And I brought this up and I was just talking with Rashana about it. I said, this year, I've probably gotten a dozen complaints, meaning calls from landlords and calls from tenants, calls from buyers and sellers who are in the middle of a rent back wanting us to come in and fix everything. I just did a video on this. If you got a chance to watch it 3 minutes, you see what my bailiwick and my soapbox is. But these are the items that they're calling about: the house condition, suspicion of mold. A lot of them want to become mold experts and say, "I've got mold in my house." Oh, you tested it? Well, no. Okay. But then when they do test it, they find out there is mold. And it's amazing to me when landlords won't leap to get that fixed. And you'll see why in just a few moments, why it just makes no sense for them not to do this. And it's going to affect them financially. Defective appliances. I would just say right on this one that the number one appliance that they do not want to go bad is the refrigerator, because you can go to a laundromat with a washer and dryer problem and you can hand wash your dishes by hand and you can live without a microwave. But if that refrigerator goes out, your tenant may lose hundreds, if not $1,000 worth of groceries if it's not acted upon quickly. Dirty house, obviously. And the landlord sometimes wants to throw this off on the previous tenant. Well, they were supposed to, and they didn't. So let me go arm wrestle with them while you're moving into a dirty house or a dusty house or a house with no light bulbs. Keys and fobs. I don't know, man. Landlords, they just like, well, I gave them a key, which is amazing to me. Or they give them one fob and one key for the whole crew. And you've got, you know, husband, wife, or roommates or whatever. And then you got these kids that are coming home at night. So they need one for the teenage driver and they give them one key. Now, the thing on this one for both tenant and landlord is unlike If I was a tenant and I got one key, I would not be complaining to the landlord. I would be running to Home Depot and getting me some keys. They're like $1.50, $2 a piece. And the latest one, the complaint I had, which was just last week, this was part of it. It was dirty house, key fob, remote, not working, landlord's not reacting. I want you to react, Anthony, as the broker. Okay. HVAC issues, unrevealed defects. We had this come up recently where when the tenant walked through, the prospective tenant walked through and the house looked great. They rented it. They signed the lease. The current tenant moved out, and behind their chest of drawers, big old hole in the wall. So the landlord obviously not moving quick enough on that. And that's the part of the challenge in the lease. What's it say? Reasonable time. It doesn't say within 3 days. It doesn't say within a week. It says a reasonable amount of time, and that can be up for interpretation. Roaches and rats, mice, rodents, squirrels. These are complaints. The landlord's not taking care of this. And it's like, like right now, as we get into the fall season, I guarantee you we will get a call from a tenant who has a squirrel in the attic because now the mice are coming in and the landlord's not taking care of it fast enough. And so the landlord's like, oh, that's going to cost me $200-300 to take care of that problem. And so they drag their feet hoping that the problem will take care of itself, and doesn't. Smells. What do we know about that? If you can smell it, you can't sell it. But we'll get calls on that. And unfulfilled promises. You said I could have parking for my maintenance truck, and now I'm getting notices from the HOA that I can't do that. You said that I could put my grandmother in the basement. Now you're saying I can't, things like that. Not put the grandmother in the basement, but you got a living quarters in the basement. Suspected code violations. So that's another thing that comes up. I don't think the landlord's doing X, Y, Z right. There was another one. I'm not sure if I got it on here. We had one recently. And the tenant, once they got there, they bought it sight unseen. And in the pictures, there's a stove and there's a dishwasher. But if you had one down, you couldn't put the other one down. That they were like in a corner. So this was like the stove and this was the dishwasher. I don't know if you can see that. The stove lid down, the dishwasher couldn't come down. Dishwasher down, the stove couldn't come down. And then they were saying, this could be a fire hazard. It could be a safety, which it probably could if you had the stove open and the dishwasher fly. I don't know. But there was a big complaint about that. It was early on in the lease, and they wanted the agent to come in and take care of everything. Not their job. So I wanted to show you real quick what kind of money these landlords are bringing down in Northern Virginia. And I use this as a tool, some would say a weapon, with landlords about taking care of their place. The average single family home in Northern Virginia, this is the last 6 months, okay, is 2,126 square feet. The average rent for that house is $4,500 in Northern Virginia. Yeah, I'm hearing the gasps. Okay. Which is, and this is what I tell the landlord, you're making $54,000 a year on this, right? And so this is where, when they're making this kind of money, if they're renting recently, like if they rented it 5 years ago and never upped the rent, they're not making $54,000. But if they are, this is where I start saying, I think this might be in the area of you're in business for real estate. You need to take care of this problem. All right. Townhouse, average square feet, 1,581. Average rent of townhouse, $3,300. They're bringing down almost 40 grand a year. Condos, average condo. Who wants to guess what the average rent is on a condo?
$2,500.
Boom, 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 boom. Way to go. Guys, I'm in a single family home out here in Bristow. And yeah, we had some down payment money and we didn't get the cheapest rate for our mortgage, but it's in the, it's like 3.941, something like that on my house. It's $1,800 a month for my 3,500 square foot house with a unfinished basement. 900 square feet condo, 2,507 is the average. $30,000 a year. So just with this right here is the good weapon or the good talking point to the landlord. You really need to take care of this. Please understand from your perspective, I know you want the tenant to take care of a lot of things. They believe I'm spending $30,000 a year. Why do you need me to put the filters in? Which that's a whole nother thing. So easy solutions, not necessarily simple. Clean up. It doesn't cost a lot to have a house professionally cleaned. And it is in the lease. And the challenge I've run into is when the tenant does it themselves but doesn't do it professionally, which the lease is what says it's supposed to do. And now the next tenant is complaining about how dirty it is, or the landlord wants to keep money, and I'm getting a call, or y'all are getting a call from the landlord. Can I take this out of the lease? Yeah, you can. And but there again, I'm not going to be the interpreter of that lease for them. I can show them the paragraph, show them what it says, but if you get into trouble with them and they sue you, that's not what I'm here for. That's what and if you saw what the code says, we're not responsible for the escrows. I'm just showing you what it says. But if you want to do that and get tempt the tenant to sue you, I'm not an attorney. You need to talk with an attorney. I tell landlords and tenants all the time, you need to talk with a mediator or a lender or a landlord, a lawyer, mediator or lawyer. Okay. Handyman walkthrough. If it's been a 2 or 3 year lease, get your handyman and walk through that. Make sure they take care of it. Enough keys for the users and a spare. That's simple. So cheap and yet big complaint. I can't even get in the house. I got one key. And you got two things. Tenants complaining. Landlord says, well, the lease only says one key. I would submit, give them a couple of keys plus one just to make it happen. Annual HVAC checkup. Pest inspection between tenants. It's $50 for a pest inspection. And most of our pest inspections find nothing. Most of them do. There's nothing. And if you find a $400 problem, then take care of it. This is a business that's bringing you upwards to $55,000 a year if you're just average, not a big house. Not a big house. You're making $55,000 a year. You can't go spend $500 to fix a termite issue. I push them against that on that one. Good landscaper, trim, and spruce up between tenants. I'm having to chase this down right now with a rental I have, and the landlord is up in New York. I get it. But he's like, well, didn't they mow the grass? Yeah, but they mow the grass, with all due respect, like a tenant mows the grass. Really low, once every 3 weeks, and they don't trim. It's not ready for the market. So we got to take care of that. Easy solution, but not necessarily simple. So here's how to take care of some pre-problem solutions. All right. Communication is huge. Mail keys and fobs. Again, this is a big issue when they're trying to move in. Explain to them the trash service, how it's going to work. It's usually about $150, $175 a quarter. You need to call this number. Preferred vendors. If the landlord does have preferred vendors, they may want to give those list of numbers to the tenant. So if the tenants is particularly if the landlord doesn't live nearby and their managing agent or their local agent is just like a brother-in-law or someone that is not a property manager. Here's my preferred vendors, Mr. and Ms. Tenant. Please call these first. Parking, especially for townhouse and condos. I'll get calls on the parking. The lease says I have a parking spot out front. It's always taken when I get home. I want the landlord to take care of it. Landlord's not responding. We get the call about the parking problem. Okay. Maintenance fees. Look, I have a deductible here. It's $50, $100, $150. And these are becoming more part of a stable of leases now, is that the tenant has to pay that up front. Make sure the tenant knows what that means. They come out here. They're going to talk to you. They're going to visit. They're going to diagnose the dishwasher. It's a $400 problem. You got to pay them $150 or $50 or whatever that is. Okay. And then the complaint will be, from the tenant, you're not performing the lease. And this is why a pre-occupancy walkthrough and a post-occupancy walkthrough, very important. And in just a moment, I'll bring that up on the screen. NVAR has this form. And also, it says in the lease that the landlord will present this to the tenant. And it's not the tenant's job to do the walkthrough. If you look at the lease, they can have them do the walkthrough, but then the landlord's on the dime for anything they find. Not on the dime, but they're like, hey, you got all these problems. And the lease says that just because I get this list of defects doesn't mean I have to fix them. If you want them fixed as a tenant, then you have to put a complaint in or put a form in. I want these items fixed that I found in walkthrough. Very important. Pictures, vital. Make sure that's done. And it's amazing to me how many people don't do this when someone is renting out the property. Good pictures and descriptions. So how to avoid post-closing calls, communication. Point out the landlord-tenant contact information for both parties. Did you call the landlord? Did you connect with them? And this also is in the lease where landlords don't want to be found. I've had to have arm wrestling with some of the landlords. They just want an email. They don't want a phone number. They don't want them to know where they live. They don't want them to know where their address is. And what I tell them is, say, look, they need a way to contact you in case you're self-managing. They need to call you when there's water flowing. Email, if you're not checking it, you don't know. And they need to know somewhere where they can deliver materials. If it's work, maybe you give them work address. So phone, email, mailing address. And if it's a P.O. box, they need a physical address where they can deliver information. I think I already did that. Yeah. Another thing is highlight lifestyle portions of the lease, particularly in a condo. Let them know what they can and can't do. And because that's when the complaints come in, when they haven't. Little items that can cause big problems, like the key, like I was talking about, the fobs. You just look for that in the lease and make sure that when you are taking that listing on, that you're pointing these things out. When you're the tenant agent, you're pointing these things out. Hey, you told me this was important to you. They don't have this. They don't have that. This may be an issue. Here's the landlord's phone number to call them. The challenge is for most folks is that they don't want to deal with the conflict. I think y'all know that. This is the biggest rent back top complaints that I get. House condition for move out. Utilities, this is huge, okay? You want everyone to hang on to the utility. If they cross over 1 or 2 days, so what? It's not a lot of money. But it's not like, let's see who can be out first. That's not what the landlord needs to be thinking about. Keep it in there till, boom, they took it over. Okay, fine, we're good. If they move in and the landlord's name's still on it, fine, do that. And then you can deal with it once they move in. But this whole thing of, I want to be off before they move in, it's kind of short-sighted. Moving out early when they owe rent, meaning they have a 10-day rent back and then they move out on the 7th day and they want to cut off their rent amount when that's not what the rent back agreement says. The rent back agreement says deadline date. Deadline date is what's in the rent back agreement. And so they want to go back and try to get money off the deposit or get money more money back from the deposit. Well, I'm not here for another 2 days, so I want $300 off of that. No, if that's not what that rent back agreement says. And this is, again, they will call you. And so what you can do is explain it to your tenant or your landlord, not landlord, but your buyer or seller. This is what this means, but you need to go back to them. Can you call them? No, I can't do that. I'm not the attorney. I'm not the mediator. I'm not the title company that's holding on to the deposit or whatever the agreement they had worked out there. Another one is the buyer, now owner, moves in and the seller thought, well, I thought they would appreciate this extra flooring. I thought they would appreciate all this paint buckets. I thought they would appreciate, and particularly on paint buckets and stuff like that. If the house was painted years ago and they've got paint left over, that paint's not going to match. And when the seller leaves that paint there, now the buyer has to go pay per bucket to deliver it to the junkyard. Okay? So that's it in a nutshell as far as the challenges we're facing when it's post-closing, post-rental out. And so I wanted to bring it up because, and this is not just new agents, folks. I get these calls from agents that are selling 15 and 20 million. I get them from calls from agents who are just starting. It is across the gamut that no one wants to deal with the conflict when the deal's over. And I'm hopefully giving you information to show the deal is over and you need to deal with this as a landlord or as a seller or as a new owner of the house. And when I do that, I'm not dumping them. But for me to go through and start negotiating, I don't have an agreement to do that. And now I'm the one getting pulled into court because I said something as a licensee that they want to hold on to and potentially, yeah, get me in trouble because I said something that they didn't agree with. Any questions, comments, examples? All right, cool. Got this done.
All right.
All right, folks. Thanks so much. Have a great weekend. And thanks for coming by today. Hopefully, this was helpful.
Thank you, Anthony.
All right.